How can an experienced productivity enthusiast make positive changes to their task management? So, this is a night we'll be talking to the productivity geeks, the nerds, the people who manage lots of tasks and who have already been through some level of development in terms of their task management. If that fits the bill for you, in fact, you may be someone who already helps other people. But what if I told you that it's inevitable that at some point you'll face some of the same challenges that beginners face? And what if I told you that it's not only inevitable, but you can't use the old approach that you've used in the past to improve your task management? My name is Francis Wade, and tonight I'll be taking you through a first of a kind discussion around assessment, its power, and how to use it to move yourself up in terms of your task management skills. But let's make sure that you can hear me and I can see you. If you could just say something in the chat, say good evening, good night, good morning, whatever time it may be for you in the world. Let me know that you're alive out there and you're hearing me, because we're going to be interacting all evening. This is just the beginning. So the purpose of our evening is to answer that question that I just asked. How do you, someone who's an experienced productivity enthusiast, continue to make positive changes? So I'm going to be speaking to give you a sense of the context of the question and how to answer it, the background. And we're going to be going into some exercises. I'll have you go back to the room that we just came from, where you'll be working at your tables on a few cases that I'll be giving you. You'll come back to this room, I'll bring you back, and you'll be answering the question that I'll be posing in the cases, and we'll do a debrief, and I'll be hopefully be able to illuminate some of the principles that you need to use if you are someone who is an experienced productivity enthusiast, someone who's managing lots of tasks. Hi, Susan. How are you? I'm seeing lots of people that I know already. So in the chat, as you can see, I'm putting in slides, and to blow up the slides, all you need to do is to double click on them. So you're someone who's already been through productivity ABC 1, 2, 3. You've been through the basics. You gained a lot from what you learned. And in fact, you enjoyed learning it, because when you learned those initial lessons, you found they made a very big difference. Probably because you were kind of a beginner, so everything you did worked, and it was kind of thrilling, right? You probably remembers what that was like to make some initial changes to your task management and feel the thrill of them actually working as you got better. But now that you're experienced managing lots of tasks, that may have been 20 years ago that you read that first book. Not so much. Now that you're managing lots of tasks, your task volume has increased, and the initial ideas that you picked up when you were a beginner or when you were just starting out don't really work as well as they used to. So something has shifted, and we're here tonight to find out exactly what that might be. Well, there's a law, and the law of diminishing returns generally says that as you become more skilled in a particular area, it's harder to make progress. And that's true for task management as well. As you add more tasks and as you perfect the very early lessons that you learned, it becomes harder to make the kind of improvements you made when you first started out. Most sports are like that, right? You invest some time in learning the fundamentals, and once you've learned them, you can't go back and, unless you're making fundamental errors, you can't go back and just learn the way you did the basics that you first learned. You can't go from college back to kindergarten, in other words, take the same lessons and hope to make progress. You need a different kind of lesson. It's true for sports. It's a reason why the problem that productivity enthusiasts who manage lots of tasks can't fix them by going to YouTube and just doing a search. And I've done these searches, by the way, just to let you know. How do I manage lots of tasks? I'm an experienced productivity enthusiast. I'm a nerd. I've read all of the basic stuff. How do I get to the next level? Well, there's a few complications, and I want to tell you about a few of them. The first is that in task management, when you learn those original lessons, you may have been a beginner, but you weren't a starter. And what do I mean by that? Well, the practices that you heard of for the first time when you were a beginner actually were practices that you were already using. They just didn't have a name. Like capturing, for example. Most people who are experienced in task management know that that's the first point of entry of a task into their system, right? But that's something that every human being does. They may not be able to name it, which means they can't improve it, they can't measure it, they can't move to any kind of level, but they kind of do it, mostly using their memory, and they get by using it, right? All right, that's the first complication. The second complication is that in task management, what makes it different is that it's not like a sport that you do for a few years and then you stop. Instead, it's a practice that you use as long as you're alive, as long as you haven't lost your senses. No Alzheimer's, no dementia. Right up until the day when you can't manage any task, you'll be managing tasks, which could be well into your old age. But most of us, I think, we're managing tasks right up until the point where we can't anymore and we pass away. So this is not a sport in the sense that it's something you engage in now and again. This is a lifelong pursuit. And the skills that you'll develop as you develop them in this session will actually last a lifetime and won't go away and won't stop. So the third complication is that as you get better at managing tasks, you will want to manage more tasks. So what forever means is that in the future, you'll be managing more tasks than you are now. Now, the only exception is when people retire. At that point, some make a conscious effort to not try to manage so many tasks. But some don't. And all of us, right up until the point when we retire, will be facing a upward curve in which we need to figure out ways to manage more tasks than we did before. You've probably noticed that since COVID, you're managing more tasks. Anybody notice that? Just put a note in the chat. If you notice that during COVID, you've been managing more tasks than you were before. All of a sudden, it's as if the world just multiplied itself. And in response, you had to scramble. Thanks, Rosemary. Yes, who else? How many of you have noticed that in COVID? The variety has changed, the volume has changed, and your tools have pretty much remained the same. So the fourth complication is that a task is not a physical object. A task is a psychological object. And psychological objects, because they're only created and their origin is here, means that they behave and operate very differently than physical objects and even digital objects. So each of those three kinds of objects each have their own idiosyncrasies. But tasks, psychological objects, have a tendency to slip out of mind and disappear. And when they disappear, we have a very difficult time managing them as a consequence. Okay, so with those complications, this is why you can't just go to YouTube. What most of us are hoping will happen, those of us who have studied under other schools of thought, who have studied, read books, taken courses, is that we're hoping that there'll be a guru who'll come and save us, right? Because it's happened before. Someone bright. You know, I took a course in the early 2000s called Mission Control, made by a brilliant guy, brilliant fellow. And we can hope that at some point another guru will show up with another, maybe a 3-letter solution. And maybe this time he'll have an app, because back when I was learning for the first time how to manage time and manage tasks, there were really no apps that were really powerful. And maybe the next time he, or it'll be a she, will show up and they'll have something great that we could just adopt. Is that going to happen? I'm going to argue and say that that's not going to happen. that is wishful thinking on our part. That a guru is really helpful when you're at the beginning. But as you become more sophisticated, as you manage more tasks, as you master the lessons of the guru, as you pick and choose from what he or she teaches, you need a different approach. And it won't come from guru number two. So why should you care about this? Who are the kinds of people who care about their task management and improving it over time? Well, they tend to be, the research says, slightly type A, very driven and ambitious and impatient and sometimes very competitive, but definitely proactive and very concerned about how long things take. And they often use their calendars to manage their activities because they're interested in accomplishing aspirational and sort of ambitious kinds of goals that other people will kind of say, doesn't he ever take a break? Have you ever met a CEO or a managing director who also does marathons in his or her spare time? A lot of them tend to be type A, and a lot of them push the envelope of what they can accomplish. So the kind of people who care a lot about this, and if this fits, consider and just think about it for a moment. If you have tendencies like this, that you're managing a lot of tasks now, more than perhaps the other people that you spend time with. And in the future, you're going to be managing even more. So this conversation could be a game changer for you. This whole line of thinking could be one that actually moves you into a different realm when it comes to your effectiveness and you're accomplishing your dreams, your aspirations, your goals, in any given part of your life. In respect to just having kids, you hear these awful stories of parents who spend their whole time sacrificing for their kids, but at the office. And when they get to 21, the kids get to 21, 22, they say, okay, well, I can spend some more time with you. The child says, I don't know who you are, and wants to have nothing to do with you. So some of the ambitions that we have in this enlightened age is that we want to raise our children in a way that does not happen. And we want to accomplish all kinds of big objectives in all parts of our lives. So more task volume, and this is the problem that type A's have, is that, as you can see from the diagram, you may start off at a particular level as a beginner, and then it grows the second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, is that as the task volume grows, it eventually bumps up against the limits of your capacity. It's like a balloon inside of a box. And as you blow on the balloon and put more air in, more tasks, it fills up the box. But the box is of corrugated, not iron, but it's of corrugated cardboard. It can't move anymore. And eventually something bursts. Something happens that causes a problem because there's more tasks than the capacity of the box can effectively manage or hold. And what happens when the number of tasks grows to that limit? Remember before I said, what if I told you that at some point it's inevitable that you'll experience the symptoms of a beginner? Well, there are unwanted symptoms that you'll experience when that balloon gets to be the size of the box. Hopefully it won't burst, right? Because it sounds awful. But it'll feel the pressure. And those unwanted symptoms in task management it's a kind of like a pressure that comes from managing lots of tasks. And here are some of the unwanted symptoms and we're going to talk about some of these in the cases that we work on tonight. Overwhelm. And you can just read through that list. These are the symptoms that they get beginners to start learning about task management. So it gets them to pick up their first book. But they're the very same symptoms that someone who is experienced feels when that balloon gets to be the size of the box. Or in other words, when they have so many tasks that it reaches the limits and the edges of their capacity. Now they've got to work on their capacity, on growing the box to escape these symptoms. Now, the reason I say this is all inevitable, let's see what my next slide says here so I don't go out of sequence. Oh, actually, my next slide says, are they inevitable? And I just said, yes, they are. But why are they inevitable? The answer is that, I didn't even put the answer. I'm going to talk through the answer with you. The answer is that we human beings love to accomplish more. And as we add more tasks and try to accomplish more, if we expand the size of that box and if we grow more capacity, what happens is that we add more tasks. So as a beginner, you maybe had a small box. You did the first set of lessons and learning and reading, and then your box grew a bit bigger. And then what happened is that you added more tasks. The balloon got even bigger until it pressed on the edges. And then maybe you found a way to make some more changes, and then it got bigger. Well, the law of diminishing returns says that you'll be finding it more difficult to grow the edges of your box, to add more capacity. But psychologically, your mind doesn't care. Your mind wants to use up all the available space in the box, all the capacity it can somehow derive. So it'll keep adding more tasks. In other words, we have an insatiable appetite for managing more tasks. And the more capacity that gets added, over time, we just keep adding more tasks. So inevitably, we start to experience those symptoms. So it sounds awful, like there's no way out, but there is, and we're going to talk about it today. So the reason this hasn't been solved yet, and the problem I'm describing of those who are more experienced, is that those who are innovating in the field, I have a little bit of a criticism for them, is that it's easier to talk to the beginners. It's not as complicated to sell things to them. Complicated stuff is harder to sell. The 4 complications I shared before are even more difficult. Hi, Jenny. Yes, you'll not only have the slides after, but you will have the recording. So don't disappear though. And another reason it hasn't been solved yet is that the results are unclear. That if you do take someone to tackle this business of increasing the size of the box because they are an advanced enthusiast, productivity enthusiast, what does the end result look like? It's much harder to teach someone. It's much easier to teach someone, just do this, just do that, and just do the other, than it is to tackle what looks to be a big problem. So if you don't solve this problem today and you say, oh, Francis, you're overblowing it, no, I don't think it's that bad. Or, well, what you could predict is that you may continue to be plagued or distracted by shiny objects. So what are some of the bright, shiny objects that are out there? Well, every week, 2 weeks, I'm someone who follows these things. Every 2 weeks, there's a brand new app out there saying it's going to solve all your problems. And you look at it, and it's written, and it's the graphics and the GUI, the way it's set up, the integration it has with Google Calendar. It's on your phone, it's on your laptop. All these fancy new features make you go, boy, I wonder if I should forgive the one I'm using now and use that one instead. And their job is to make their app seem as attractive as possible. That's one kind of bright, shiny object that is only going to increase in time. The other is the new practices that we come around every few months or so. Right now, it's very popular to talk about start the day like Elon Musk, or start the day like Bill Gates, or start right now, one of the habits that's being promoted, and it's being shared all over the place, bright, shiny object, is that the way you spend the first hour of the day determines the rest of the day. No, it may be true. I mean, I think there's something to it. But it's been around forever. And it's become a bit of a meme, right? Something that people think is going to be, oh yeah, this will be the solution to the problem if you're someone who's already experienced. I'm going to propose that we throw all that away and that there are answers to what you should do in lots of areas of expertise. So pick a sport, pick something like chess, pick an area of academic study, pick anything that requires an investment of time and effort. And the law of diminishing returns is true no matter what. You always get to the point where as you put in more and more and more and more studying, you get fewer and fewer results. But there's a change you have to make, a switch. And the switch is towards something to do with self-reflection rather than chasing down a guru. Something to do with an assessment rather than bright, shiny objects. So if I'm talking to you and this is resonating, I imagine that you're what we call a multitasker in our online community. You're a little bit type A, right? You are faced, we will always have a question of how do I manage more tasks? It'll always be that pressure, like the balloon on the box. As soon as you can do more, you do more. As soon as you get more capacity, you immediately use it up. And if you're like me, the unwanted symptoms are just around the corner. So we're going to be using all that I'm saying tonight in the exercises. So don't forget any of it. You'll be carrying it into the cases that you'll be examining and reporting on tonight. But I really want to take you from the place where you may have felt a bit alone, because almost no one speaks to us, people who are already experienced and already know the basics. And no one provides answers. I'm going to provide some answers tonight, or attempt to. And the reason I can speak with a bit of experience is because I used to teach a guru-like course back in the early 2000s. I got tired of doing it, and I had a moment about 2003. I led a program. My mom attended it, and 3 months later, I asked her, "How's it going? How are you using?" She seemed happy in the course. How are you using the stuff I taught? She says, "Well, it's not really for me." No, I started to argue with her, right? Like an idiot. I said, "No, yes, it is." Because I was deep in one-size-fits-all world, which is the world that gurus tend to promote. Right? It's simpler to say, yeah, but everybody should use exactly what I'm teaching, and it does apply to you. So I tried to convince my poor mom that, yes, what I taught did apply to her, and that she should start using it right away. I was an ass. It wasn't until later on, about 2 years later, I gave up teaching that program, in part because I got feedback from her and others, and moved to Jamaica. And then I had an explosion in the number of tasks I was managing, and I started to struggle. I picked up GTD thinking that was the answer. It made things worse. And the reason it made things worse is that it was actually geared for lower task volume than the system I had learned in the early 2000s. So in other words, I stepped back thinking that it was something, I didn't really know this, but I stepped back thinking that a system that was designed for lower task volume would work for me, and it didn't. So when I actually started developing a first program, I said, there's no one size fits all. So if there's not a one size fits all for everyone, that means I need to somehow give people a way to do this analysis on their own. I can't sit with them and coach them through what they need to do. There's not enough coaches in the world for all of us to have a coach who gets to this level. We need to figure out a way to do our own diagnosis and our own analysis. And that's what today is all about. How do you do the kind of assessment as someone who is experienced managing lots of tasks that can make a difference? How do you change gears? So I've talked a lot. And at this point, I want to see if there's any questions before I go into the agenda, or as I go into the agenda. Just drop some questions in the chat if you have any that are there right now that I can answer. Because we're going to be covering 3 points. The first is I'm going to contrast slow versus rapid assessments, pros and cons. We're going to be doing an exercise. So we're going to break from this format. We're going to go over into the networking mode, which is, those Those of you who came early, remember we're at the tables. We're going to go back to the tables. You're going to work in groups. You're going to work on 2 cases, and then you're going to come back and report. And then finally, the final part is the coming back to the report. So I don't see that there's any questions. So Romain asks, why not limit or reduce tasks versus expanding the box? Great question, because that's some of the advice that is given to type A's. Well, I'll tell you why it doesn't work. It runs against the psychology of wanting to accomplish great things. Now, some people say, why don't you just cut back your number of projects? Well, if you even have 1 project, if you're someone who is very driven, what the research says is that you will broaden the depth of what you're trying to accomplish, the 1 project, and you'll create tens, hundreds of tasks to accomplish your objective. Asking someone to cut back the number of tasks is like asking them to step back from their commitments. Now, a type B might do that, and type B's do that. Type A's don't. So really what type A's do is they keep pressing in the direction of more. And it's not a compulsion. Sometimes it may be, but most times it's not. It's just a commitment to do something extraordinary. And with that commitment, which you don't take away very easily, because for type A's, it's a part of who they are. Taking it away is like taking away oxygen. This is who they are. And Romain, it's hard to take away that part of who that person is. So very great question. That dynamic is very, very frequent. Type B is telling type A's, well, why don't you just scale it back? And type A's are like, no. They may not say it, but that's what they mean. Okay, so let's talk about what it is to be a diagnostician. Craig says, agreed, Francis. Conscientious individuals actually feel guilty if they're not overcommitted. That's a quote. Wow. Peter Jordan, University of Toronto. Wow. And yeah, Romain, burning out is a huge issue for type A's. And they need advanced techniques to prevent that from happening. So part of what they need to learn is, how do I manage myself? Someone who has huge aspirations, how do I expand the box so that I keep my life in balance? A huge issue for type A's is not burning out. Okay, so the good news is that, guess what? You're already a diagnostician. And right in this moment, as I'm speaking, everyone in this webinar is diagnosing what I'm saying. You're weighing and you're asking, will what he's saying work for me? Is that true for me? Is it not true for me? So I don't need to tell you that you need to diagnose. I'm just willing to point out that you're at it all the time. And when you read that book or took the training or got advice from someone tells you you're trying to do too much, cut back the number of tasks, or you read an advertisement for an app, you're diagnosing, will that make a difference for me? And in that moment, you're deciding yes or no. So you're already diagnosing. Let's just try to take it up a notch with some tools. Question is, what do you diagnose with? And this is true even people, when I've taught hundreds of people in task management, time management programs, and they sit there diagnosing. People who read most popular book, GTD, diagnose in one way when they were a beginner, and 10 years later, 20 years later, they read the same book and they're like, they diagnose it very differently. So our approach, the one I'm going to share with you tonight that we use at 2Time Labs, is to use the task system analysis method, or TSAM. And it's embedded in 3 places at the moment. It's in my book, Perfect Time-Based Productivity, which you can purchase on Amazon. Get into what we're talking about. There is the New Habits 1 or 2-day training, which is a face-to-face training, as you can imagine. I haven't done too much of those very recently. And they're in the My Time Design online training that we also deliver. And today I'm going to be introducing you to My Time Design Rapid Assessment. That's the program that today is really all about. I'm going to invite you to register in it and actually start taking it for yourself. So here's the heart, the practices that are at the heart of the TSAM method. They're made up of 13 independent practices. And I've put a link there that you can dig into later on if you want to write that down. By the way, if you double click on a slide, sorry, not double click, take that back. If you right click on a slide and say open in another tab, it'll open that slide into another tab so that you can see the tab and save it for later, just so that you know, okay? You may even be able to download it. I know that I can in the top right-hand corner. I'm not sure if you can, but I know I can. So at the heart of the task system analysis method are 13 independent practices. Some of them may look familiar to you because some of the language may even be similar. The new version of getting things done uses the word capturing. For example, it used to use collecting, I think. So the idea is that tasks come into your system, they get captured somewhere for safekeeping, and then later on, at some point, they get emptied from the point of capture. And when they get emptied, you have 5 choices to act now, store, schedule, list, or toss. Okay, those are the only choices. And in addition to these 7, which we call the fundamentals, which have to do directly with how you manipulate tasks, there's also switching, which is swapping from one task to another, how you do that. Interrupting, which is stopping a task, like sleeping with an alarm clock. It's an interruption. It's a planned interruption. It's a skill in and of itself. Reviewing, which is going over your task management system to make sure it's working and that you're not being overloaded and that maybe there are improvements you could make. And it's also about setting plans for the following week. There's warning, which is about checking to see if your system is about to break. Habiting, which is putting in place a brand new habit for the very first time, identifying it and bringing it into your behavior pattern. And then there's flowing, which is entering into the flow state, or what we call deep work, which means basically doing extremely focused work, the kind where you hate to be interrupted. So Dale's dropped the link to the description of those 13. So in each of our programs, there's a description of them, but you're going to be using that description right now. So I hope you're really listening, right? So here's what the description produces when you do your assessment in the rapid assessment program. Here's what you get. You get a profile. And the profile, if you click on the diagram, click on the graphic in the chat, it'll expand to fill the screen. So in 20 minutes, we figured out a way to take something that used to take better part of a couple of days, maybe 2 hours of the 2-day program. And if you're doing it online, at least maybe the same 2 hours. And using an online quiz, we're able to produce a profile looking like this. And as you can tell from the profile, all 13 skills are laid out. And for this particular individual, let's call him Bob, he's just starting, just becoming aware of 3 practices. He's already started on 6, but he's at a very low level. And there are 4 practices that he's taken up to a higher level. So this is what his profile looks like. So he's already been doing probably a little bit of work on his task management, which is why he's not all starting out. So here's the exercise, my friends. And you may find this intriguing and challenging at the same time, but the way it works in the rapid assessment program is that you take the online quiz, which takes about 20 minutes to complete. You get a profile for yourself, you analyze that profile, and you develop a Pareto improvement plan. So a Pareto improvement plan is a list of improvements that involve a small change that have a big effect, or they make a big positive improvement. And I dropped also the link for the program, but I'll tell you more about the program later on. But this is the essential steps of the program. So you leave with a plan. Ryan says, can you be straddling 2 time zones? Not sure what the question means. Ryan, you want to elaborate on that a little bit? We'll see what that means. So your profile could look something like this. And here's the question that you're going to be answering in an exercise just now. What does that mean? What does that profile mean? Oh, whether you be in bronze or silver. Or coaching, Ryan, is that if you find yourself in the middle, that you choose the lower one. Why? Because then you can make some easy improvements and move to the next higher one. So that's been the advice if you find yourself straddling two zones. Great question. So what does this report mean? You're going to answer this question. So a Pareto plan, a Pareto improvement plan, let me show you what that looks like, because it takes some interpretation, right? So obviously this person has some strengths and some weaknesses, and we're going to move now into the exercise. And I'll show you what a plan looks like. So what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to give you a case. It's going to look exactly like this. It's actually this case. So this is the case of Anne. And Anne is experiencing the following symptoms. And Anne also this is what her profile looks like. Okay. So her Pareto improvement plan would look like this. For example, so Anne may say, okay, I want to improve. A 3-step Pareto improvement plan would say, improve emptying to the goal level. First one. Second one, improve tossing to the goal level. And third, the third step would be improve habiting to the bronze level. So let me tell you, this is an awful plan. Of how you could analyze Anne's profile and come up with 3 improvements that she could make. And that's what the exercise is that you're just about to engage in. What is a good plan for her to engage in? So here are the steps I'm going to have you have some fun with. So when I switch over, so we're going to switch over from presentation mode into what's called networking mode, and I'll put a picture of it, which you're going to be at these tables. In case if you're not familiar with Remo puts you at a table to change tables with and join other people. There's 4 per table. Just double click on the table that you intend to go to, not the one that you're on, the one that you want to go to. Okay. So I want you to form into teams of 4. Pick a spokesperson. Discuss the 2 cases. You just saw the Anne case. I'm going to give you the Dwayne case. Craft a Pareto improvement plan, 3 steps for each individual, and in your discussion, say why you think that that's a decent plan, and return in 15 minutes time, ready to give you a report. Okay, and that's the exercise. Wow. All right, so here's the second case, and remember you can right click on the graphic and open it up in a new tab if you need to. When we go into presentation, into the table mode, into networking mode, you'll see that the chat, the chat is exactly the same. Just click on chat, go to the group chat, and you'll see all of these diagrams available to you. Okay, they're not going anywhere. Any questions before we go into and do the exercise? I'll have a timer running at the top of the screen so that you will know how much time you have left. Any questions? If there are no more questions, we're going to go ahead and do the exercise. You actually have a chance to do this for yourself, not on your own. Both cases, man, Craig, both cases. Do both, because I'm going to bring you back up and we'll debrief both. Okay, so let me stop the recording here. And let's go over, remember, the cases are in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can find me and ask me. You'll need to come to